give you that bit of information is we're going to have some educator leader cadre members, and that's part of the PARCC system, is to develop local, meaning Illinois, folks who have some more training and knowledge about PARCC, and I'll talk a little bit about how that process has gone in Illinois as well after lunch. But we'll have a panel. Hopefully they'll come a little early, so they will be here when our panel starts. From various roles, all members of the educator leader cadre, and they're going to talk to us about the Common Core implementation and PARCC implementation. And the thing that I want to say, if I forget it, as long as it's popping into my head now, I'm going to say it now, is really PARCC is really about implementing Common Core, right? If we implement Common Core well, if we truly do what Common Core asks us to in terms of teaching and what students will be able to do in terms of learning, PARCC will be a breeze, won't be a problem, because we'll have those high-level thinking skills and those ability to analyze text and to do complex mathematics already, because we are implementing the Common Core well. So it's really about implementation of Common Core, and oh, by the way, there's a new test because Common Core is different and we have to measure something different. Okay? So we are really going to structure our panel around implementation of Common Core, and then oh, by the way, there's this test that aligns to Common Core more closely than our current state tests do. Okay? So that's my deal, because otherwise I'm going to have to run long. And I don't want to keep you from lunch. It's bad when you've been with people a long time. They have memories of things that maybe shouldn't be remembered. I forgot, as usual, to introduce myself before our fun little discussion shout out about assessment. My name is Mary O'Brien, and I'm the Director of Assessment for ISB. So don't shoot me now. We'll just move right along. We're working. And I have the pleasure, I'll introduce my panel in just a minute, but I wanted to, as I said, contextualize a little bit about assessment. We're talking about balanced assessment. I think NCLB has become, one of my analogies is a huge snowball that's run downhill and piled over all of us, and we're all like in this snowball trying to get out, because it has caused us to look at assessment in a very narrow way, and we want to break out of that NCLB snowball and look at assessment in a more balanced manner. So one of the things that we talk about when we talk, and I've been told very directly, what are these? These are not silos, they are corn cribs, right? Is that right? Grain bins. See, grain bins. They are not silos. So we're talking about silos, but that's a misnomer, so I apologize for all of you south of I-80, because I didn't mean to do that. So talking about how we can put together all of these pieces that everybody's working on in schools and make some sense about them. And one of the cross-cutting features is assessment, right? How assessment weaves through all of those grain bins. Okay, excuse the woman behind the curtain for a minute. I'm all caught up. I'm all tangled in my little mic. No, I like to move. If they put me on a what is that, yeah, I'm bad, because I could walk right off the edge, yeah, so don't do that. So we want to talk about balanced assessment in terms of strategically using assessment to gather data about students. Part of that is a PARCC issue, part of that is a summative, but it's also bigger than that, as I said before. So we are conceptualizing this with 3 parts, and I'll get to that in a minute. But we want to be able to gather data, and with your verbs, you're talking about student demonstrating, measuring things, but and analyzing. So it's about gathering information, right? That taking in how a student's performing, through maybe exhibiting certain knowledge and skills and using that, analyzing that information. So those verbs were great in terms of how we're trying to conceptualize assessment in a broader term. We want to be able to address immediate student needs. That's not so easily done on a summative assessment. We all know that. And it's less easy to inform ongoing instructional changes and to guide long-term improvement, although summative assessment is pretty good at that third check mark. So this is the graphic that we stole liberally. I know educators are really good at that, and we are good at that in our division, talking about the three types of, but we gave attribution, so I just want you to notice there's attribution at the bottom of the slide. Three types of assessment to make a balanced assessment system. Formative assessment, that regular feedback so that teachers can change instruction, change the standards, provide more access to students, and that's very frequent, right, in classrooms. That's why there's so many F bubbles in that little square. Then interim assessment happens, sometimes it's called benchmark. We just chose to use the word interim, but it's the same idea, that happening on a longer basis, looking at some bigger chunks of information, performance of students, designed to look at curriculum and instruction as well as a little bit of student performance, but more raising up that idea, because I can't get as much information about a student on an interim assessment as I can on a formative assessment. Make sense? Yeah, because it's happening all the time, and we're gathering data all the time as we're teaching. Then the summative is really about, and we've kind of taken this use away, but the summative is really about how our curriculum and instructional programs, the big chunks, are working. We've tried to squeeze every piece of data out of summative assessments, because for a long time in the early 2000s, for those of you who are around in the early 2000s, we didn't have much of anything else, right? And so we wanted to get every drop of data out of that summative assessment that we could about individual students. And sometimes that is not appropriate. Those assessments were not designed to give that level of information. And we've tried to fit it, and it doesn't necessarily meet the needs that we have to change our instruction. So summative assessment. The PARCC is a summative assessment. It's really good. It's really different than what we have right now. It's allowing students to show performance on different kinds of tasks than just a one-time short answer or fill in the blank kind of test. It's a different kind of test. It's better. But it still is only here. It is not, the summative pieces are not designed to do these two things. So and I wanted to make this quick, and it is, yes. Various assessment types. We want to make sure when we're balancing our system that we're putting in good formative assessment. That's difficult because I don't know about all of you, but many of us came through teacher preparation programs and have done professional development that have not taught us how to do formative assessment well. And so it's a skill that we need to develop in educators. We need to support that. We want to be able to use the most relevant assessment data. So we've been going around, and Angela can attest to this, to talk to different districts about what their assessment system looks like. And teachers at one district told us just straight up, yep, we give that textbook test every Friday, and we put it on the shelf. And there it goes, and there it stays forever, right? And so apparently that's not relevant to them. They're not using those data. The students are doing some kind of performance, but they're not using those data because it's not relevant. It doesn't help them adjust their instruction. So we are working on developing some materials to help districts and schools look at a balanced assessment system and provide support for teachers to do that. Okay, so PARCC, the idea that Casey so eloquently talked to us about is that summative assessment. And I'll just say, it is a very good summative assessment. It's more, it gathers more information than our current state tests. It gives us a different look at student performance, which will help guide overall our programs that we're providing. So it's that end piece, it's that summative piece. Does it show student growth over time? Absolutely, it does demonstrate that. But it's one piece of showing growth over time. So, as I said earlier, really you want to talk about implementation of the Common Core state standards, because it's really not about the test. No matter what NCLB and the snowball that it created did, really the summative assessment is only about telling us, are we implementing our curriculum? Is our curriculum, are our instructional strategies or the instruction that we're using effective? That's what that is meant to do in a large sense. So really, it's about implementation of Common Core, and that our goal is to have more assessment types. So, on to these lovely folks who are sitting before you. Yay! They have, I don't know if you guys knew what you were getting into when you applied for this, but I'll introduce, these are our Educator Leader Cadres. The Educator Leader Cadre is supported by the PARCC system, so that was part of the implementation. Knowing, very wisely, PARCC did, that just having a few people involved in development or reviews of items isn't enough to get this new way of assessing students in a summative manner out to the field. And so they asked each state to have a process to develop an Educator Leader Cadre. Christy, and maybe I'll let you guys tell a little bit of your background, because I won't remember, quite honestly. I'll just be straight up honest. I know, I'm sorry. But I already messed up Fred's. He already knows I don't know what he does. I know he teaches. I don't know what. So he does something with kids. So Christy, a little bit about your background.
Okay. So, can you hear me?
You got to wait a minute.
Now you can hear me. We use these for assemblies in the morning, so I should have known to wait for the green light. My name's Christy Hilde. I am an assistant principal at an elementary school in Mattoon, Illinois. And I work with about 780 students, K through 5, and about 90 staff members. Prior to that, I taught for 9 years and worked in a middle school setting as well, and have done some work with the ISAT prior to starting with PARCC. That's a nutshell.
Fred's at the end.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Jean Corder.
Hi.
Hi, Jean. Yeah, with a lower voice than I'm used to because I've had a cold for a week that I can't get rid of. So I'm half the time I'm singing bass, and the other time I'm not singing at all. So I am the director of curriculum, instruction, and assessment for Urbana School District right down the road. I have been in that position for 13, 14 years now. Prior to that, I was the fine arts coordinator for the district. Also did some work on ISAT. I did a lot of work with the fine arts standards when those were being developed. But we're very happy to be here, and I'll pass it to Sue.
Good afternoon, everybody. Sue Luzzy from Chicago Public Schools. Born and raised in the city, came back and started teaching in the city in the high needs areas. My role now is an instructional support leader. So I go in and I coach principals, teachers, and teacher leaders and literacy coaches and the likes around the best practices, especially rolling out Common Core. I also serve in the community that has the highest percentage of ELLs in the city, in the Pilsen Little Village community. So if you ever need to do taco crawl, let me know. I got the places for you to go. I, too, have also done some work on the ISAT. And I also work with Achieve on their equipped jury, where there's 24 educators from across the country, and we're looking for some quality curriculum so we can get some good resources in the hands of our teachers.
Thanks. I am Gene Olson. I am the Director of Student Services in District 89 in Glen Ellen, Illinois. Previously, I've had different roles. I've been in special education in the classroom, as well as building leadership and district leadership and special ed, as well as Executive Director for Learning and Teaching, building and kind of just starting to implement Common Core state standards and unpacking those standards and looking for resources that don't exist. And just kind of different aspects of that. But currently, I'm the Director of Special Student Services, so I service students with English language needs, as well as students with IEPs and 504s, and then all around student services needs in the district.
Good afternoon. My name is Fred Schlessinger. I teach at Culver School in Niles, Illinois. And as I am last, of course, that makes me the math person. And
We love you,
We understand
Fred.
that. We
love
understand
you.
we're the stepchild of LA.
The tie also helps.
Yes. I taught 18 years of junior high math and algebra. The last 3 years
God
I've
bless
been
you.
involved in a STEM program that we're piloting in the district. Started actually working, IGAP, if some of you remember
Yeah.
those.
Woohoo! Woo!
Yeah, and then we had ISAT, and now we're going to have, yes, there's a lot of gray in my hair. And then
Yeah.
when this whole thing started for me, it was in a very warm, small room at ISU for Linda Reby when she locked us up and told us we had to figure out all the gaps and all of the standards coming through. And
Okay.
happy to be here.
So it's all Reeby's fault. So just a little bit about the ELC. That, as I said, PARCC developed this concept across all of the states, and just a network of educators who get a little more information. I think 3, right? We've had 3 ELC face-to-face meetings and a few virtual. See, I 2 virtual. Just to get more information about PARCC, keep them up to date on the latest information. They provide feedback for PARCC implementation to the PARCC team. And then the reason they're here today is that last bullet is to facilitate communication with the field regarding the Common Core State Standards and PARCC. They have a lot of knowledge to share, and so we thought we would bring them in and give you the skinny. I've said that already. So we also have, I'll tell about the regionals, because we don't have a southern person, do we? Sorry. So we've divided our cadre into 3 groups, the northern group, the central group, and the southern group. And the northern group, Jean and Sue and Fred are all in that group, and they are planning a conference, a workshop for December the 9th. At Northern Illinois University. Ooh, I'm getting some facts right. I'm so excited. So they're doing that. That's a part of their work as a educator leader cadre. The central group, which is Jean and Christy, are also doing some planning some workshops in spring semester. That is as close as we've gotten to a date at this point in time.
February, but
Okay, January, February, in that area, so stay tuned. And then just serving as regional resources for PARCC and Common Core State Standards. So what we thought we would do, and I think this slide is next, woohoo! So we thought we'd post some questions to the panel and let them talk about their experience and work helping implement Common Core State Standards and PARCC. So from a central office perspective, and that would be maybe Jean and Jean. What has been most helpful for your district in the implementation of Common Core?
Well, in that regard, for us, it's really been the message from ISB that they are committed to the implementation of the Common Core. And we jumped early. We took ISB at its word 2 years ago when they said we are adopting the Common Core standards. They are now your Illinois Learning Standards for language, arts, and math. And we started major revisions of our language, arts, mathematics, and disciplinary literacy curriculum and phased in a roll-in of the new course content. So I think that message loud and clear that ISB was firmly committed to the Common Core helped set some of our folks who were a little bit more reluctant set their minds at rest that they weren't going to do all this work because it is a lot of work, and we do depend on our teachers to do that work, but they weren't going to invest the time to revamp and revise their entire curriculum from early childhood through 12th grade, and then 2 years later, 3 years later, something else was going to be newer and shinier, and it would be the next squirrel coming along. So I think from our standpoint, it was the message from the state board that we were firmly committed to the Common Core, and those of us who are in the field needed to get busy in changing our curriculum. So
I would kind of mirror some of the comments that Jean had made. I think the biggest attribute that we've had from a central level perspective is time. It takes a tremendous amount of time, and it's not just the aspect of the logistics of getting it done. It's kind of the old adage that those that do the work get the learning. And so really having a nice opportunity for teachers to go in, unpack those standards, and doing it from an early on perspective where, you know, PARCC was so far away, you know, a couple of years away, where it was just like just focus on the standards. If you're focusing on the standards and you're implementing the standards well, whatever comes will come. And you know, for those in high school districts too who are still really wed to ACT and that whole conversation, still college career ready aligned, right? So just focus on the standards. And so that's kind of just been the mantra. And you know, the state legislature actually did that. Celebration, right? They did
Yeah.
something. They actually passed a law and made those standards the lay of the land. And so I would have to say that again, and the consistent messaging from the state level around that as well.
Okay, great. So from a classroom perspective, oh, Sue, I'm sorry, Sue.
No, that's okay. Just to kind of piggyback on what Jean and Jean have said, I think in Chicago Public Schools, we have over 400,000 students enrolled. And just in my network alone, I'm looking at about 35,000 kids pre-K-12. So in essence, in my network, we operate much like our own school district. But having that intense focus and having everything aligned to Common Core, I think is key. Everything has to flow from Common Core. If it doesn't fit through that lens, you have to really question if it's something worth adding onto the plate of your teachers. I cannot stress enough how much of an intense focus and intentionality and how deliberate you have to be in working with teachers to implement these standards. You have got to give them permission to really focus on these standards and take some things off of their plate. You just can't keep adding things onto it. And again, aligning everything in your district to the standards, I think, is another essential piece and sends the right message. It shouldn't be about the PARCC assessment next year. It really should be about what is the professional development that we're doing today that can get implemented in the classrooms tomorrow that aligns back to the standards. So making sure that your PD for principals as well is aligned to Common Core. That's one key piece. You know, if you can go back and redo things. You know, we've done a lot of PD for teachers, and so in pockets within Chicago, we have some teachers doing some amazing work. We have a lot of teachers actually doing amazing work with Common Core, but the leaders in the building aren't as familiar with the standards as the teachers are, and that's a big problem. So making sure from a central office perspective that you hit these multi-level tiers so that the leaders in your district, the principals in your district, the teachers in your district, they're all on the same page when it comes to the standards.
Perfect, thank you. So then, from a classroom perspective, what are the concerns that you've heard from fellow educators? And Christy, I'm going to kind of give you the classroom perspective as well.
Yeah.
What concerns have you heard about the Common Core state standards and PARCC?
Yeah, I would say from a classroom perspective, a lot of worry. You know, in the elementary land, we are full of teachers who are perfectionists. I mean, they want to do it right. They want to know what is the right way to do this. Tell me what to do, and I will do it, and I will make it look great, too, while I'm doing it. So I feel like teachers are just seeking out some affirmation that, hey, it's okay, let's try this. Let's figure it out. If it doesn't work and it doesn't align as well as you had hoped, or if it doesn't hit the intent of the standard, that's okay. Let's talk about it, figure out what we could do differently, and move on from there. I would say that the biggest concern from the folks that I work with is just, okay, I'm reading the standard. What does that look like? Tell me what that means. Help me figure it out. And allowing teachers the opportunity to collaborate with other teachers who are having successes with implementation of the standards is crucial and key. And I would say the flip side of that coin is offering support from building level leadership that, hey, I'm behind you 100%. We will figure this out and we'll figure it out together. And you're not, you know, failing is not failing unless we don't learn from it. And just supporting them to keep trying and having time to figure out what the standards mean and what they look like. And I do know we're working on some resources also with some video modeling of what standard implementation would look like with students in a real classroom, and people are hungry for that. So I feel like in your buildings, if you can offer teachers opportunities to either observe one another, which we know from research is a great best practice anyway, if we can offer that opportunity, or even neighboring school districts, or if you can reach out and just let them know that there are resources available, or that if they want to try something, give it a go, I would say. Biggest concern.
Most of my perspective comes in terms of math, to be very honest, and I think the biggest angst with most of what I see in our township deals with the gaps. Those of you that have been in your buildings have realized that the Common Core and the way that they've had everything aligned has a lot more rigor involved at earlier grade levels. And the teachers are concerned about building the background knowledge in their students where they're not there, and how to support that and backload it. And the other thing is, and while I joked about it earlier, I think we all need to take it very seriously in terms of that. Mainly like what we've talked about in our K-8 buildings, we have teachers that are tremendous ELA reading and writing teachers. I mean, they know it verse and rhyme, and they are tremendous at it. But they have their own personal phobias when it comes to math, and we need to support them. We need to give them resources so they understand how to fill those gaps. We need to articulate within our own buildings and our townships to make sure that we can build up those fluencies. But right now, that's probably the number one thing that I'm hearing throughout most of it is, Fred, we're already going through fractional computation in September, and our students haven't really gotten to that point yet. And it's going to be a learning curve for them, and we need to support it through, you know, the other grade levels and talk to each other about it.
Yeah, it's developing math confidence in your staff members just as much as they want to develop math confidence in their students. You know, and that confidence comes from good PD. It's not just like, you can do it, all of that helps. It's also just actually teaching them and allowing them to learn how to teach the math.
And I think the other thing is that all of them are very concerned in terms of time. Everything is a time management thing. We did lesson 1 today, Fred, and we didn't get through it. That's okay. They need to know that. They need to know what they do. They need to do well and how to go through those progressions. And the book's not your curriculum, which I'm sure you've all heard before. But with math, it seems that it's some type of a myth that we need to bust, and we need to have teachers develop curriculum in that area.
Yeah.
But those are probably the 2 main things I've heard.
And the other thing that I'm hearing more and more as we move closer to PARCC is about the technology divide.
Yeah.
And the great technology divide, and not just infrastructure. When folks first start talking about the technology divide, the first place they go is broadband, you know, broadband or whatever
Right.
that is. I don't.
Right.
I bandwidth. That's
Bandwidth.
it. I need Tim.
Broadway.
I need Tim here to talk me through this. But just the infrastructure pieces and having enough devices and having the right devices. And I think the technology divide goes much, much deeper than that. I think if you will look very, very closely inside your Common Core, whether it's the new science standards or math or ELA, there are technology assumptions made in terms of the competencies and the skills that students need in order to be successful in the 21st century. And I think many, many of our schools and our students are underprepared, and that worries me more than devices and infrastructure.
So let's go on. We can say then, what additional information, and you've talked a little bit about that, Fred, but anybody else have an add? What additional information do you all think educators need about PARCC, about CCSS?
Well, if you're asking PARCC specifically, the message that it's on time and it's on task and it is an amazing assessment. I would just repeat that. You know, I feel like the group of us share similar beliefs about what is best for students in terms of teaching and learning and growth and progression, and PARCC mirrors that. And there are a lot of questions and there's a lot in the media about it. And I think anything we can do to prevent the Common Core and the PARCC assessment system from becoming a political issue is so important because it just takes away from what's best for kids. So it is on time, and it is on task, and it is a very worthy assessment system.
The other thing I wanted to mention about PARCC also deals with a little bit about what you might not heard, is that teachers are directly involved in item analysis, going through all the questions, vetting them themselves. I mean, we've all sat through workshops, you know, hours on end, and the item analysis is actually like a week lockdown. I think they probably talked to Linda about how to lock down and do it correctly, where, you know, you have to sign out to go to the bathroom type of thing. But it's a very, you know, it's an intense process, and it's heavily involved with teachers. Teachers give feedback. They listen to teachers. It's a high quality type of assessment that we're really on the ground level doing. And the examples that are out there are very good examples and ways that you can help prepare your students, for taking the PARCC assessment. So.
I think another bit of information is that PARCC is really designed for all students. It's not designed for the mainstream kid that has access to all these things. When you look at the standards, I talk to educators every day. There's nothing in the standards that people disagree with. They're good standards, and it's what you want all of your kids to be able to do. But I think sometimes we get into the frenzy because the assessments might have some accountability to it. But we shouldn't worry about the accountability if we do the standards right for all kids. And I think that's a difference that we're finally going to set apart from what we've typically been used to in our statewide ISAT and the accommodations and modifications that are coming with PARCC, because it is on a technology platform. I think a lot of those misnomers of this assessment is only going to work for some kids. Has to kind of be dispelled a little bit. This assessment is going to work for all kids, and it's going to give us a good measure of where the students are in relation to where they are with the grade level. And so I know there were some comments earlier made about ELLs and students with disabilities, but at the end of the day, all those students still have to have access and be held accountable to that same set of standards. We don't want to make something easier because they have a label after their name. I think that's a huge disservice. But I do think that PARCC is going to allow our students multiple ways into the assessment, so they have ways and modes to view it and respond.
And I would just a little bit like to say, let's stop talking and debating about ACT or no ACT. No, but all of the time that we waste, all the time that we spend wasting our breath debating about whether the ACT is here, the ACT is going, how does this mean for us in the ACT, I really don't care. PARCC has been built from the ground up to reflect the Commons Core standards, and ACT never was. And so if we can move past that conversation, that will be huge.
Practically speaking, also in terms of like on the classroom level, I think if you're working with teachers or school districts or building level leaders who have not interacted with the prototypes, please encourage them to do that. All grade levels are represented now in the prototype, so there are sample items available for every grade level that will be tested in the PARCC assessment system. And I believe January they're going to be relaunched on the actual testing platform, which is TestNav 8. Yes, okay. So at that point then, students will be able to interact with it just the way that they will on PARCC. We had our faculty meeting last Thursday, and as part of the faculty meeting, we started with a prototype, and we didn't say what grade level, it was math. And as the teachers rolled in, we said, all right, your bell work is, let's solve this problem. Let's do this task up here. And we had interacted with the prototypes a little bit, but this was one of the new items that's just been released. And the conversation that ensued after interacting with that was about the standards. And that was really cool because it was less about, are we going to have enough computers? Or are we going to have enough time? Oh my goodness, how are kids going to be able to type a response? It was less about that. It was more about, wow, this item really does measure some of those hard to measure areas in the mathematical practice standards, and it asks kids to really perform to what the standards are expecting. So if you're working with building level people, I would really strongly encourage you to direct them toward the prototypes and have them use it with staff members, not just kids. Kids, obviously, yeah, that's great, but staff members, it starts some really good, important growth conversations.
You want ours?
No, I don't. I'm low battery. That's okay, I can yell. So Jean Olson, I wanted you to a little bit talk about, from your perspective, what have been difficult shifts for CCSS, and particularly, I think that same thing that Sue mentioned for EL, teachers of students who are EL and teachers of students with disabilities.
Well, Mary, we must be on the same page because I was quiet on the other questions because I was going to do a bit of an extended response on this one. I really think that for the biggest shift that we're really struggling with at districts is really kind of looking at the pedagogical shift, the instructional shift that needs to occur. And I would also argue that we're not taking enough of the long-range view of this. And from a student services perspective, I go back to Public Law 94-142, access, getting kids into the building. Then in the 80s, we said, oh, wow, these kids are here. Maybe they should learn something. And so then we said, okay, we're going to put goals in place and all this other kind of stuff. Like, oh, wow, wait, we've got these goals in place, but we don't really know if these kids are learning anything. And so then in the 90s and the early aughts, we have NCLB rolling along, and you're not going to find a student services person who says they love NCLB. But one of the good things it did is it made all kids count. Now, inaccurately, ineffectively, all that other kind of stuff, but it made all kids count. And so now, this is the next iteration. This is the next civil rights thing to happen for our students who struggle and don't fit into the system we've developed. And so this is an equity issue. This is an access issue. And this is the system responding in a very responsible, thoughtful way to make sure that all means all. And in the past, when we've all waved that banner, all means all, everyone, yep, but then immediately we got barriers. Well, I can't measure the kid the same way that he's measuring them, so how do I really know? Well, you can't measure me as an instructor next to that other instructor because, well, you know, the data's not there. How do you really know? So really, with the grain bins, okay, with the grain bins, it's really an exciting time to be in education because we've not answered all the questions, but we've thought of them. All right, we're thinking of how all these things come together, and it's not about test scores. It's really not. That's the teeth, that's the accountability piece, that's what gets people to move. It's about giving all kids a chance to be held to rigorous standards and show what they know. And so from this perspective, from my personal perspective, the biggest shift is that we need to get back to the why. We need to be in front of our staff and in front of our teachers saying, this is why this is right. This is about access, equity, providing, putting professionals back on the tier in our society, that teachers are professionals. We have rigorous standards. We're getting kids there. This is how you know. This is a whole comprehensive time to fix all the things that we have said have been the yeah buts. And so I think it's a systemic shift that's tough. It's a shift of hearts and minds. And then again, you can't teach these standards unless you're discussing the math practices, the science practices, and the inherent pedagogical shifts in ELA. So those are the two things.
Yeah, which means that it's not fast. Which means that we're not going to implement the standards this year, or we're not going to adopt a Common Core-based textbook series, because what Gene's talking about is really paradigm shift. It's, you know, one of the things that you hear, and I think that question from your personal perspective, what's the most difficult shift? The most difficult thing is hearing, oh, we're totally doing that. Oh yeah, my kids reference text in their answers. Okay, we're not getting it. It's going back to the heart. What are these standards about? So it's not quick, and it shouldn't be. These are thoughtful, important conversations. And the problem I feel like in the buildings is that we feel like we're in a hurry. You know, we have 2 early release days this year. We got to get it done. So we got 2 hours. We're going to do ELA on January 5th, and we're going to do math on May 15th. Folks, that is a recipe for disaster. So convincing, I feel like at the building base, I'm like trying to convince the district level people, you know, like, hey, we need more time. But it depends on where you are. Everybody feels that need, but giving ourselves permission to do it right instead of do it by PARCC. You know, PARCC's going to come, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and it is an awesome assessment, and I feel like we'll learn a lot. Teachers will be like, oh, that's what that means. Okay, got it. That's going to help us, but it can't be our finish line. It can't be like the stopwatch stops then, because the work is really just beginning.
I also think some of the differences in terms of understanding what we mean when we talk about the different shifts, I think there's a misnomer when we talk about rigor and conceptual understanding in terms of mathematics, because I think, and part of this is actually my generation of teachers, you know, the high 40s, 50-somethings, maybe low 50-somethings. No. But the idea is, you know, our rigor used to be, well, they're doing 4th grade math, so we'll have them do 5th grade, and that's more rigor. And that really isn't. What it is teaching them material a year early that they would have gotten any other way, and we lose the deeper understanding of what these numbers actually mean and how they fit together and how they work. And again, it goes to the PD, but the idea that we need to understand what depth means. what depth of meaning and how to go deeper into curriculum and challenge those students that are ready for those challenges, and then be able to differentiate for, you know, our floor-to-ceiling learners and have everybody be working toward the same type of concept but understand what the baseline is and what the depth is. And I think that's going to be a big challenge.
I think another big instructional shift around ELA goes back to having teachers have thoughtful conversations about the text they put in front of kids. I think all too often we've had a book, and the book gave us the theme for the quarter or the unit, and there were a whole bunch of stories in there that circulated around that theme, some on grade level, some off grade level, and then we had these really great little guided readers that went with them. And that's kind of how we taught. Common Core isn't asking us to throw that away, but they are asking us to be a lot more thoughtful about the complex text that we put in front of kids. And teachers have to have that conversation about how to qualitatively look at a text and know that it's complex for that grade level. And more importantly, now that they've identified that this text is complex, having the conversation of how do we teach it to our kids? How do we get our kids into this text and understand how to read it? And I know in Chicago, we've done so much work around balanced literacy. This is a huge shift for our teachers because they feel like it's a one or nothing kind of position to take, that it's always got to be complex text and all of our best practices around balanced literacy are out the window, or they're going to stick to a balanced literacy, no frustrational text, kids reading independently, and they don't know how this complex piece is going to fit in. So having teachers have that conversation about when is it going to be appropriate for guided reading, when is it going to be appropriate for independent reading, what text is going to be appropriate, and then when I'm teaching in my whole group, what are the types of texts that I need to expose my kids to, and how am I going to scaffold and support kids into reading that? I think that's a huge shift, and I know in Chicago we're 2 years into it, and we've got 5 more years to go. It's huge. It's like moving the mountain, especially because resources are kind of limited around this as well. So again, the prototype items, I think, set a good stage. They have the qualitative rubrics online with the text, so you can see how you can evaluate the text. But teachers need to have the time. And they need more time than just that 1 hour a week grade level meeting that sometimes doesn't even happen because the gym teacher and art teacher are covering classes or called in sick. You have to provide the time and space. If that time and space is not there, these conversations don't happen and your Common Core is going to fall flat on its face.
Just real quickly, going back to the grain bin analogy, if I don't know if another bin would be appropriate in that picture, but whatever the machine is that takes the grain out, you know, that kind of brings them all and puts them, what's it called? An auger. So I really think we're missing Illinois shared learning environment as the auger. Illinois has a shared learning environment, which is a technological tool. They're building it, developing, ongoing. And what kind of triggered that was Sue was saying, the resources are limited, right? Well, what Illinois is doing is really kind of finding and vetting resources that link to these standards so teachers can go from a dashboard and really kind of say, these are the standards I'm looking at, okay? And the other thing that Sue also said was time and space as a resource, but I would also include that as a consideration when you're working with text complexity. It's not just quantitative and qualitative for text complexity, it's also the time and space that your readers are coming to that text and what their prior knowledge is, vocabulary. So the text complexity also really, again, takes in this access and equity piece by saying we can't put culturally irrelevant text in front of kids if we're thinking they're going to access it. Okay, so those are just my other 2 comments for that.
And just any more advice that you have? No, I think it goes back to the common theme that you hear: time and time and time, and time for the teachers to actually get their hands dirty, to talk with each other about what is complex text. It's not just difficult. What makes it complex? How do we encourage student independence, and when do we let go? How do we scaffold but not enable? So, I mean, those are huge conversations, and you can't do it without ample time to do that.
One last piece of advice, if you have, I'm not 100% sure on everybody on your exact roles with school districts, but if you're working with building level leadership or district level leadership, encourage people to look at the Accommodations and Accessibility Manual, because it is not just about PARCC. It is about best practices surrounding student needs, and it's all students. if you look at section 5 in that, if you make a note to look at section 5, do a PLC study group on that, something, because such rich conversations will happen as a result of looking at that, and it's about way more than IEP accommodations.
I think one of the things that we've gotten together and talked about as a group since we've become Educator Cadre leaders is how we get the message out to the rest of the state. And part of what we're doing in the northern section is getting together and putting together a PD for schools in that area. But then the idea is to build the Cadre Leader program to an extent where they can go out, and we need to start getting the word throughout the state so the message is common. And that's very important to us. We consider that something that's part of our charge, because the right message needs to be the message that we're giving, and everybody needs to kind of understand what the information is. And I don't think any one of us could, opens up our email to an extent on a daily basis and probably has 4 or 5 different workshops that would be available to you going through the Common Core. And these are things that we really understand, that we want to make sure that the message is correct, it's vetted, and that we can then bring that out. So where the opportunity is there, attend them and hopefully get some building leadership involved, and then be able to get that message throughout the state and build the meaning of what the actual Common Core is in Park.
You have a question? The Accessibility and Accommodations Manual. If you go to the park, if you go to parkonline.org, you'll find it, I think, on the far left side. Well, first you click Park Assessment at the top, and then on the far left, it's like policies, I think. Yeah, and it'll be down there. Uh-huh.
And our contact information is on the website too, right?
One last bit of advice. Working in a large urban district, there's a lot of things that we do really, really well, and then there's some things that you just can't kind of control for with hundreds of schools. But I think as a word of advice, I would really, as a district, develop or work with district leaders to develop a vision for Common Core, not for Park. Develop a vision of what Common Core is going to look like, and not at the end of this year. It's a long-term plan. And then back map yourself into that vision. That is so essential. Otherwise, every year you're going to be living year to year and you're not going to move anywhere. You're just going to spin your wheels. I think the second piece, that in order to do this work, you can become the expert. You can have your curriculum and instruction person be the expert, but it's really hard to get that one person across many schools. And I cannot stress enough, our work in Chicago would not have moved unless we had developed teacher leaders and gotten a handful of schools, about 60 of our schools, out in front of Common Core when it was first came out as early adopters. We didn't call them pilots because we don't like that word anymore, but we called them early adopters. And these groups of teachers met many times over the course of 2 years to develop Common Core curriculum, Common Core assessments, to get smarter about it. And as a result of that hard work, our district has some really good samples for teachers to look at and use, and for us to use in PD. So I think there's that piece about building the leadership that can help lead the work in the ground level. And I'll be honest with you, I sit through a lot of PDs, but as a teacher, the PD that I most respected and most listened to was when it came from my colleagues. I cannot stress the importance of teacher leadership. And again, making sure that everything you have going on in your district is aligned to the Common Core. Everything, every PD, every administrator conversation you have, everything going back to the Common Core, I think is huge.
Oftentimes in high school, middle and high school level, that speak no English at all. So taking those students into consideration as this assessment is being developed was my concern.
Yes.
Not to water down, because
Right.
that's the problem that a lot of teachers
Absolutely.
had. They thought that they needed to water down the standards. That's not what I said at all. So I want
Right.
to make sure that point is
Right.
cleared up.
And I also want to add, and I appreciate that very much. Casey mentioned bias and sensitivity. I happen to be on that review team, the accommodation. I don't know what AAF stands for anymore. It's accommodations, something, and fairness. I don't know. But anyway, we do absolutely take into account, is this, could this potentially react negatively for any particular group, or does it advantage any particular group, right? And on the flip side, disadvantage. So I appreciate your heartfelt want to have a fair, unbiased assessment, and I think we're working very hard at that.
That's the feeling we need all educators to have, is that passion about, I don't want to make it easier. I just want them to have access.
Yeah.
And understanding it's about access, not about making it easier. So
And a lot of what was discussed today is in a written format, which is the area that those students have difficulty with.
Right.
particularly,
Right.
The reading and the writing.
Right.
So that's why I articulated that concern.
Right.
And the accommodations manual kind of articulates some things that are available for all kids. Some kids to self-identify, and then also have case managers do that. But right now there is pretty much what they need to write will need to be in English. But otherwise, what they're hearing and the prompts, if it's not measuring those skills, it will be in multiple languages. And so I think it's a wonderful opportunity again for us to really be cheerleaders of this and say that right people at the table, they've thought of everything, and you'll see that reflected in there. And universal design for learning, if that's new to the folks that you're working with, CAST, C-A-S-T, has wonderful resources for people to understand that aspect too, so that's another resource as well.
Thanks. Other questions for the panel? Well, I want to say round of applause, please, because they are wonderful.
Pack up.
I'm not sure about our audience makeup, but I think we have a lot of folks here who are going to be through the Illinois Center for School Improvement, going to districts, and these districts are not high-performing districts, and they really haven't engaged with the Common Core state standards. And they're going to have some really difficult conversations. And is there anything we can think about to help them in terms of barriers they're going to come up against? For instance, I'm certain they'll encounter someone out there who's going to say, oh, that's not a problem. We've hired ABC company who's going to come in and align all of our curriculum.
Yeah.
to the
That-
Common Core state standards."
don't hire the Common Core ninjas or whatever.
No. Okay. Yeah. This is. Okay, fair warning, I'm about to get on a soapbox. There is no replacement for smart teachers doing the right work.
Yeah.
And you can't hire somebody to come in and wave a magic wand and do it for you. You have to do what Sue said. You have to get a vision. You have to be crystal clear about what that vision is, where you're going, where you are right now, and you have to get a long-term plan for how you're going to get there. You can't get on the bandwagon. You can't live in la-la land while somebody else does the hard work. You've got to do the hard work yourself, or it's not going to be meaningful for your kids. It's not going to be meaningful for your teachers. It's not going to be meaningful for anybody.
Yeah, I would say practically speaking, from going into a building and saying, all right, here are the standards and we've got to get this happening in the classroom. Practically speaking, what I would encourage you all to do is to have a list of questions that can help a building leader facilitate teachers, first of all, reading the standards, doing an informal gap analysis of, we think we're already doing this, we know we're not doing this, setting up a PD for the building level leader to lead or teacher leaders to lead by crafting some careful questions that will guide them through the standards. Because I would be surprised if many of the schools have staff members who've even read all the standards. I know that's the case in some schools around us even. And if we haven't read them, we can't implement them. Even if my textbook says this is language standard 4, grade 3, or whatever, you have to actually engage with the standards. So create some opportunities for them, help them do that. And if nothing else, having the grade levels work together through those standards and the grade specific standards would be hugely important. Similarly, I would encourage you to create some type of PD around the model content frameworks. I saw earlier today you guys talked about those. So, but those two things together, that's where I would start. And I would, if you have some resistance or if there's building level leadership that don't understand them, then you all creating a list of questions and coaching the building level leader through, here's how you would lead the PD. That would probably be effective.
A lot of the work of your coordination with the center will kind of help with the instructional coaching components. The only thing that I can help offer is that what moves districts that I've worked with and that I've been in is utilize the levers that are already inherent. So, the different levers of accountability, the 5 Essentials survey, all of these different levels. If you're a rising star district, if you're low performing, the odds are you're on a rising star plan. Use those levers to start speaking the speak of the liabilities of the principal and the superintendent and board. And they're there. I mean, again, policy is not going to get us out of this, but I have to be quite honest with you, that what the state has done and what our legislature has done following the guidance of ISBE, they've really crafted some really good, solid policy levers to help good people like y'all. That's for you, Christy.
Yeah, she did say y'all.
Yeah. To go out there and start utilizing those levers so it's not on you. Say, I'm not this person from the center coming in. It's like, this is how we can do it. And then also use the cadre. We're all throughout the state. If someone's kind of giving you a little bit of a rub because you're from the center or ISBE-ish or whatever that is, contact us. And we can come in and we can say whatever we want.
Whatever you want. And then we leave.
I think part of what we also need to look at when you're dealing with districts that have some challenges is to have very realistic goal setting and understand that there's going to be some difficulties, there's going to be some pitfalls, and to understand where they are and begin to build them. And it's not something that's going to happen this year or next year, but then find those victories, celebrate them, and really anoint those teacher leaders to become and give faith to that. The leader in the building, to let them know that you have the people there, and we need to then, if we don't, we need to build and find those leaders within the building to have those people come through and build this core up, because it's going to be a slow process.
I also think another key piece here, when I look at struggling districts and struggling schools, I don't look at those schools and find that they have teachers there that don't want to be there. I look at those schools and I'm impressed by how much concern, care, and love that the teachers have for the students inside the walls. But what I also typically find is that those schools also have too much on their plate, and they're kind of a yes man to everything that walks through the door. So they have a million initiatives going on, and they're not doing any one thing well. So having conversations, I would start with a lot of them with just first, in Chicago we call them CIWPs, continuous improvement plans, but I know across the state we're using Rising Star, which the template's actually pretty similar. I would start there because you need a vision, but at the end of the day, the money speaks volumes. So where do they see themselves improving, and how are they allocating those funds to it, and having coaching conversations that way, I think are really important. And I also think coaching principals and school leadership teams into a focus of Common Core that's where the most bang for the buck is gonna come. And then in schools, they have a lot of structures in place. I'm sure that in every building, teachers meet at teacher team meetings during common planning time. They have, maybe not all the time. And I know that but I think there are some places where you can start embedding some professional development that are already existing. And so sometimes it's not adding more and saying we have to do all this PD and in the next 10 weeks we're going to do 12 hours worth of PD. It's taking a step back, looking at the school schedules, and then helping with district administrators to figure out when is the best time to do this. Can you offer after school courses? Can you offer morning staff meetings that are solely focused on professional development and create a newsletter to get all the nitty gritty stuff out to your staff? in leveraging some of those time that you already have in your building for teachers to collaborate to focus on Common Core. And also moving kind of past the conversation of just reading and understanding the standards, having teachers come together every week to plan their Common Core lessons. There's a lot of power there because teachers are focused for that upcoming week on what they need to teach their kids, and having that collaborative conversation around the text, around the questions they're going to ask, around the tasks kids are going to have. That's really, really powerful conversation for teachers, and that helps them not, in Chicago we spent almost a year unpacking the standards, but we never moved on the standards in that year. But if teachers are going to start pulling these standards together, they can unpack them while they're figuring out how they're going to teach them. But they need the time to do that. And I think just be really resourceful and look at what you already have established in the building and use that time to support the work in Common Core.